Hajj is divided into three types. The highest being tamattu', the middle being qiran, the last being ifrad. And a person has the right to choose any of the three. And we're assuming that this is your first Hajj. So you can choose whichever you want. The Prophet ﷺ Hajj was qiran. And he justified performing qiran, not tamattu', because he had his sacrifice all the way with him from Medina to Mecca. So it was physically there with him. And whoever drives his sacrifice with him, he cannot take off his ihram until he offers his sacrifice, his hadi. Alayhi salatu wasalam clearly indicated and advised them to perform umrah and to cut their hair and wear their normal clothes until the 8th of the Hijjah. So tamattu' is the highest. The format of tamattu' is different than qiran and ifrad because it has a separate umrah in the beginning, and that afterwards, from the 8th Dhul Hijjah onwards, the tasks of the person doing tamattu' is as good and as close as the tasks done by the person doing qiran or ifrad. Qiran and ifrad are identical. However, the difference is in two things. One, that the intention in qiran is to embed, is to include the reward of umrah, though there isn't any separate umrah as in the case of the mutamatti'. Two, that the person performing qiran must slaughter his sacrifice on the day of Eid, which is known as al-hadi, while the person doing ifrad does not have to sacrifice anything. Going back to the pillars of Hajj, you remember that the pillars of Hajj is ihram and standing on Arafat, tawaf of Hajj, and sa'i of Hajj. In the case of the mutamatti', he adds to that another tawaf and another sa'i, which are for his umrah. These are separate. So from the 8th of the Hijjah, even the mutamatti' has to perform one tawaf of Hajj, known as Tawaf al-Ifada, and Sa'i al-Hajj. So they're all identical in what they have to perform on the 8th of the Hijjah onwards. But the only difference, on the other hand, is that the Qarin and the Mufrid have the luxury of performing Sa'i al-Hajj on the 8th of the Hijjah after they do Tawaf al-Qudum. And this is an option they have the luxury of choosing, or if they decide, they just go to Mina directly or go to Arafah directly, and on the day of Hajj onwards, they, as the mutamatti', have to perform one Tawaf al-Hajj and Sa'i al-Hajj. But if they chose the earlier option, then after the day of Eid, they have only Tawaf al-Hajj or Tawaf al-Ifada remaining, because the Sa'i was done earlier. And we spoke about that. So I don't think we will need to repeat that. Yet we will come, inshallah, to discuss the acts of the days of Hajj in detail now. We stopped at the pilgrims or the pilgrimage days. So the first day of the pilgrimage, according to the Sunnah, which means that you can come earlier and you can come later. But the sunnah is, which is recommended, which you will be rewarded for, and if you don't follow it, there's no sin upon you. The sunnah is to come on the 8th day of the Hijjah. On the 8th day of the Hijjah, the sunnah is to come before noon, so that you would reach there in time enough for you to put your luggage and get your spot in the camp, get acquainted to it. Usually, the vast majority of people go on the 9th of the 7th, the previous night, especially those who want to do tawaf and sa'i, to avoid the crowd, though it is crowded. But instead of having like 1 million, you will have 800,000, which is not a big difference, but still. So a lot of the people go on the 7th to Mina. They go to their camps, to the tents, to their residential area, put their stuff, and the sunnah is for them to pray Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, and Isha in Mina on the 8th day of the Hijjah, where they tend to shorten Dhuhr, Asr, and Isha. Any 4 rak'ah, they pray it as 2 rak'ah, but they pray it on time. They do not combine prayers to one another. This is the sunnah. They pray each prayer on time. And one may ask, okay, so the 8th of the Hijjah, we're supposed to go to Mina. Now, if I'm performing Qiran or I'm performing Ifrad, I don't have to pay attention to Ihram, because I am already in the state of Ihram. Remember, when I flew over, when I drove, when I crossed the Miqat zone, I entered in the state of Ihram. So even if I arrived a week earlier to Mecca, I'm still in the state of Ihram. But for the person who is in the state of Ihram and who is performing Tamattu', we know that he came a month ago or so and he performed the Umrah. He clipped his hair. Now he's wearing his normal clothes, wearing perfume. Where should he assume the state of Hajj? Not only that, residents of Mecca, where should they assume the state of Ihram for their Hajj? Well, listen, scholars say that those living within the boundaries of Miqat, when they want to perform Hajj, they perform it from wherever they are. So the people of Jeddah, when we want to perform Hajj, we say Labbaik Allahumma Hajj, put our ihram and go. People of Mecca, when they want to perform Hajj, they do that from their own homes. Unlike if they want to perform Umrah. If a resident of Mecca, of the Haram area, wants to perform Umrah, he's obliged to go outside of the Haram zone, says Labbaik Allahumma Umrah, wears his ihram, and enters. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ ordered Mother Aisha, who was in the Haram zone after Hajj, and she said, "O Prophet of Allah, I would like to perform Umrah." So after a short conversation, the Prophet ordered his brother-in-law, that is the brother of Aisha, his name is Abdul Rahman, to take his sister and go to At-Tan'im, which is outside the Haram zone. And she would make her ihram from there. And nowadays, it's the closest area to the Haram. This is why most people who would like to repeat their Umrah, they go to At-Tan'im, or what is known now as Masjid Aisha. They'd built a masjid there. So people make their ihram and come back. So one asks, why the why the segregation? Why do we differentiate between Umrah and Hajj when it comes to ihram from Mecca? The answer, and Allah knows best, is that Umrah linguistically means to visit. And if you are living in the Haram area, I cannot visit my home because I'm living in my home. So it was sunnah and even mandatory for the people of the Haram zone to exit it in order to come inside visiting in their ihram and intending to make Umrah. As for Hajj, no. The person doing tamattu', the person who is residing in Haram area, makes his ihram from his own home, from wherever he is. So the people of Jeddah do it from Jeddah, they make the niyyah and go. So we are in Mina, inshallah. We are wearing our ihram. We've prayed Dhuhr, 2 rak'ahs, Asr, 2 rak'ahs, Maghrib, 3 rak'ahs, Isha, 2 rak'ahs. Then we take a good night's sleep. Of course, those who pray night prayer, those who offer witr, business as usual. Then comes the 9th of the Hijjah, which is called the day of Arafah. And Arafah is a mountain near to Mina and to Mecca, where we will come and discuss what people should do there. So the 9th of the Hijjah is called the day of Arafah. And the following day, the 10th of the Hijjah, is called day of Eid, Eid al-Adha, or the day of the grand pilgrimage, because of the many tasks being performed in it. And the following 3 days are known as Ayyam al-Tashriq. So we have the 9th, 10th, and the 11th, 12th, and the 13th with names. People give them names. What about the 8th day of the Hijjah? Doesn't it have a name? Yes, it does. It is called Yawm al-Tarwiyah. And this is because on that day, the pilgrims, they water their camels, their rides, and make them drink a lot, because on the rest of the journey, when they go to Mina, Arafah, Muzdalifah, and back to Mina, there might not be facilities to drink from, so the camels would go on. As we know, the camels can go on without water for many days, providing they take their storage first. So the 8th day, Yawm al-Tarwiyah, followed by known as Ayyam al-Tashriq. And why do we call them Ayyam al-Tashriq? Because on the 10th day, when the pilgrims slaughter their sacrifices, they slice the meat into pieces, thin pieces, and they expose it to the sun so it becomes dry and it can be stored. And these are the days of the Hajj.